At this point, we have 3 Quiet Place movies, 2 directed by John Krasinski, the mainline movies, part 1 and part 2, and now the new spin-off prequel, Quiet Place Day 1, not from John Krasinski, directed by Michael Sarnowski. And each of these movies brings something very different to this world, a different piece of the puzzle, so I'm going to go ahead and rank them from worst to best. And just kind of as a disclaimer, I think all 3 of these movies are great. I don't think there's even a mediocre movie in this bunch, so it's really splitting hairs between which ones I like better. I think all 3 are very suspenseful, enjoyable movies that bring different things to this continuity, and this is a franchise that I'd honestly love to see just go forever. I feel like the possibilities are endless when you have a franchise like this taking place in a very specific apocalyptic scenario that is also applicable to really anywhere in the world, any character. You could set it anywhere, and I'm sure you could find something interesting to do with that no matter what. But let's kick it off. Let's start it off with number 3, and that would be Quiet Place Part 2. Like I said, this is still an amazing movie. It's a great continuation of the first movie. It follows up really well with it, and I think that this movie adds a lot of interesting pieces to the puzzle in terms of the story. We finally get to see a glimpse into what actually got the aliens here. We finally see that they are aliens, that they crash landed to Earth from comets, and we got to see a little bit of the hectic nature of the panic when this thing first started, when it first began, and how people reacted to it. Then on top of that, we also have a great performance from Cillian Murphy, one of the best actors working today. And just like the first movie, it finds ways to ante things up a bit, add more fear, suspense. The thing that I think maybe sets it a little bit behind, it doesn't have the freshness of that first movie, whereas, you know, when the first movie came out, it was a very fresh, new thing, new concept, interesting idea. And although this continues at the same level of quality, I think this movie is, in terms of story, plot, character, everything, is just as good as the first movie, I'd say. The only thing that really bumps it down is that it's just not as original, but it's still just as good, so that doesn't mean much. The only other part that I think I would nitpick maybe a tiny bit about it is that it feels like they play a little bit more loose with the sounds. It doesn't feel like they're in as much danger with certain scenarios, where in the first movie it felt like any noise was certain death. It just feels like the impact was lessened a bit in this movie. It feels like it's just maybe not as urgent as it was, but that's okay because it's so minimal, and still so many other things that are great about this movie. The main cast of characters, you know, they were amazing in the first movie, they're amazing in this one. I guess the second part that makes me enjoy it a tiny bit less than the first movie is the absence of John Krasinski throughout the majority of this movie besides the beginning. But once again, you know, that hole is kind of filled by Cillian Murphy, so that definitely kind of minimizes that absence a bit. You get to discover more things about this world. You find the Survivor Island, you find how other people have survived and kind of grown to become scumbags. Although it's familiar stuff for apocalyptic stories, I think that they tell it in a way that's interesting because of the unique way in which they have to survive in this world and the unique weaknesses of the Death Angels. All that wrapping it up, it's still an amazing, great Quiet Place movie. It's just, you know, splitting hairs. It's at the bottom. Now for number 2, the original Quiet Place. Now this movie was just such a fresh, unique idea when it first came out, and you know, we've had a lot of copies since. We had that Stanley Tucci Netflix movie, we had Bird Box. A lot of movies trying to use that, you know, you can't use a certain sense or, you know, something like that, and if you do, you die. You can't speak, you can't listen, you know, it's just a template that's now been copied. And you know that means that this movie is something special, but it also takes the small scale approach to it. There's hints to a bigger world in this movie, a bigger world that obviously is continued in both its subsequent movies. So the small scale story just focuses on this family, how they survive, the rules of this world. John Krasinski kind of trying to figure out what weaknesses these Death Angels have. It's just an interesting movie because the first time I saw it, it really made me think all the ways in which they survive. They put down sand, they play games with pieces of cloth, they minimize as much noise as possible, and then also how do you survive with a deaf daughter, but also even the advantage that brings because they already know sign language. It went on to spawn a franchise, and it's very much deserved because through great performances, great suspense, and just a great set of rules to establish this world and ground it in horror. This movie was just a classic in the making, and it was always going to be because of the nature of it. I really love that first movie, and you know, it's kind of crazy that it's actually number 2. But for number 1, it's the new movie Quiet Place Day 1, and It's not recency bias, I promise. I actually saw this movie at a test screening in December, and then that was kind of a bit of a different version of it than I saw today in the final cut of what we got. But overall, this movie is so good because it's very much a character drama, almost disguised in the shell of a Quiet Place movie. This really does feel like it was directed by an indie director, and it feels like a great complementary piece to both those first two movies. Although Michael Sarnowski is definitely providing all the things we come to expect from this franchise, the scares, just finding new ways to make you cringe, finding new ways to weaponize noise, and especially when you have the city, you have that interesting aspect of it where there are so many things that can make noise, there are so many people there. What does that look like in the face of an extinction level event like this, an apocalypse like this? How do people manage? But that really isn't the focus of the movie. It's mainly concerned about these characters. The story about two people connecting, Lupita Nyong'o and her character of Sammy, and Joseph Quinn and his character of Eric. The movie is just about these two, very broken, lost people in a very desperate and hopeless situation that end up finding each other in the face of this new reality, and how the simple comforts that we ordinarily take for granted would just hit so different in a situation like that, and how much they mean. Just these characters could have both had their unique flaws that would have made them potentially annoying, but they characterize them in a way that's either very compelling, very human. They feel like real people, and where Sammy could have been kind of annoying and broody, she actually comes across as very sympathetic and compelling. Joseph Quinn could have come across as annoying, but he was characterized in a way that made his flaws very endearing, and it's also the way that he overcomes them makes you root for him all the more. I really love this movie. I think it's the best that the franchise has to offer, and it all comes back to the fact that it puts the characters first and foremost. This isn't a typical Quiet Place or horror movie, and that doesn't mean anything against that's nothing against the Quiet Place movies, because obviously that's a very high bar. All three are of very high quality. But what I mean by it's not a typical horror movie is that it's a bit slower at times. It's a bit character driven. And that's really what it is. It's not just a group of people trying to get from point A to point B and survive against monsters. It's mainly about these characters and their connection. And that's why I bought into it. That's why I love it. And that's why it's my favorite movie of the year. But let me know what you guys think about my ranking. How would you rank the Quiet Place movies? I'd be very interested to hear. What are your thoughts on the new movie, A Quiet Place Day One? I'm GM Light. Have a good one.